Okay. Oh, Lana, were you going to say something in terms of introduction, instructions,
yes,
or anything? Okay.
Yes. Well, welcome everyone. Good morning. Welcome to IPMG's Professional Development Workshop. We are very excited to have as our guest speaker Dr. Angela Amado. She is going to speak with us about connecting individuals with disabilities and community members. And before I officially introduce Dr. Amado, I do want to go over just a few housekeeping things. As always, you are welcome to type any questions that you have in the chat message section of the webinar menu, and we will take those questions at the end of the presentation. This training has been approved for one Advocare external training credit, so case managers that are in attendance should submit your confirmation of attendance email, which will be sent to you from public relations at go2ipmg.com. So that will be where that email comes from. You'll want to follow the Advocare instructions to receive this credit. If for some reason you do not receive that confirmation of attendance email within 2 business days of today, please contact IPMG customer service. Also, within 2 business days of today's training, we will be providing a link to the recording and associated materials and questions and answers to all registrants and attendees that will be sent by email and will also be available on IPMG's website and social media sites. Also, just to give a heads up for planning purposes, we will not have a professional development workshop in October due to IPMG's company event that our employees will be attending, but on November the 20th, we will resume, and Ruth Roberts, IPMG's executive assistant and request for approval specialist, will be providing a workshop on understanding the Medicaid waiver request for approval process. So that information will be coming soon so that you can register for that. It really is with great pleasure that I introduce to you Dr. Angela Amado. She is with the University of Minnesota's Institute on Community Integration and has worked in the field of disabilities for over 30 years in a variety of capacities, including national research, direct support, international consulting, and government policy. She is also the Executive Director of the Human Services Research and Developmental Center. For the last 25 years, she has worked on strategies to bring individuals with disabilities together with ordinary community members in friendship and relationships to promote fully inclusive communities. She is internationally known for her key books on friendship between individuals with disabilities and community members, and has provided training across the U.S., Canada, Netherlands, Australia, and Israel concerning inclusion, community membership, person-centered planning, and self-determination. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Angela Amado. And with that, I will be turning this over so that she can begin her presentation.
Great, thank you, Lana. And it's so exciting to be here. And oh, I have to say, show my screen here. Okay. I heard over 400 people registered for this today, and so that is so great that there's such interest in this. And so just because our time is limited, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go give you some examples and let you know about some other places to find information and strategies about connecting people, and kind of give you sort of a broad picture of what I've learned in 25 years. I started on this, working on this topic because lots and lots of people had said when people started coming out of institutions, people were in the community, but they weren't necessarily of the community. And we still say that, 30 years later, and it's still the situation for many people who have disabilities. And although most of my work has been around people with developmental disabilities, these strategies have also been used with people with mental health issues or people who are aging, and with many people. So in terms of what you can see you see the right-hand box that has all of the GoToWebinar information on it, do I have to close that box, or are you just seeing the PowerPoint, Lana?
They just see the PowerPoint. That's fine. You're
good.
good.
All right, good. All right. So, so just some kind of basic kind of background stuff is when we talk about integration, people often mean many different things by it. This is a definition I have from John O'Brien, who says people with disabilities have active opportunities to spend most of each day and most of their lives in good relationships with ordinary people in common community settings, but also that people without disabilities have active opportunities to spend most of each day and some of their lives in good relationships. So we're talking about really breaking down those separations between us and them, moving toward an all of us together world. And as I was saying, I started working on this because although people have said it's important, when I first started working on this, not a lot of people, there wasn't a lot of people that I saw actually doing something about it. Like, were there things we could actually do to help people connect more in more friendships, more intimate relationships, more community memberships, more belonging? You know, were there things agencies could actually do? And so my first project, which was just called Friends, was actually 25 years ago. We learned a lot about what staff and professionals could do to help people connect. And I've continued to learn since then, continued to work with many different agencies, continued to learn from other people who are also working on this. So this is just a diagram kind of showing the situation of many people who receive services. The lower right triangle represents sort of the disability world. Many people live just surrounded by other people with disabilities and staff. The upper left represents the community world. It's often like two different worlds. And how can we bring people together across these boundaries? I have a particular passion about that. But also one of the ways we can test the strength of the boundary is how do community members see people? How do your community members really see people who receive services? Do they see their role in building inclusive communities? Are they reaching across the boundaries also? This is just when I do a whole day-long workshop with people, we kind of like go over a lot about why is it important to work on this area, but I'll just kind of give you a brief summary here. Is first of all that relationships are important to all of us. There isn't any way that you are that you think about yourself that you haven't learned from other people. You know, when people say when people look at why are people happy, there's a lot of research about happiness. This is a slide about somebody who actually studied it. What comes up consistently at the top of the charts is not, as many might expect, success, youth, good looks, or any of those enviable assets. The clear winner is relationships, close ones, followed by a happy marriage. So it's the reason we're the most happy. It's the thing most important to us when we look back on our lives, like as we're coming close to the end of our lives, what people look back on is how much love there was in their life and their relationships with people. The second thing is that people with a disability label themselves express to us in many different ways that friendships and relationships are important. They express in many different ways that relationships with ordinary community members are important to them. You might have people, for example, or support people who one of the first things they do is hug people, like they hug strangers, right? Or if you've ever had a chance to walk into a place where there's a lot of people with disabilities in one place, like if you've ever had a chance to walk into a place where there's, like for example, a large sheltered workshop or an institution or a large group home or group residential facility, if you walk in as a stranger, you can like look at what's the first thing that happens to you. Like, and I know many of you know the first thing that happens to you is like you get kind of surrounded by people. You get swarmed by people, some people say. You know, just as a visitor, or even as a staff member, it's like people coming up to you and, oh, I'm Shannon. What's your name? You know, where are you from? And if you really get sensitive to that communication, you can often feel the hunger of people in that situation in terms of connecting with community members. And there's many other ways that people really express to us how important relationships are. The third reason to work on this is people's health and well-being. You know, we put a lot of emphasis in our field on people being healthy, but our relationships are the number one reason for people's health. Like people who have studied social isolation, for example, know that if you're socially isolated, you're going to get sick and you're going to die sooner than if you're not. And actually, social isolation is as great a mortality risk. That means it's as likely to kill you as smoking is. And we don't often put an emphasis in our health care plans or addressing health issues for people that their relationships with people are a major factor in people's health and well-being. And then when relationships are supported, people change. And I'll give you some examples about that. And also the last thing is providing community members the opportunity to be contributed to. So just a couple of things about that. One way is we can look at people's relationship network. This is a map. Some of you may be familiar with mapping people's relationships, and we can map different arenas through which people know people. If we put you in the middle, in the first circle we would put the people you know the best or see the most. In the next circle we put people you know less well. In the outermost circle are people who are acquaintances. And we can map the differences between our relationships and the relationships of someone who receives services. And this is also a tool that you can use to actually map your progress. If you really seriously take this on, working on this, you can actually map the progress about how people are expanding in the number of relationships. It might be that you support people who, a lot of people know them, everybody in town knows Bobby. But if we look at those relationships, they're often on the outermost circle. They're often acquaintances. So we can also look at increasing the depth of a relationship. How do we bring people more toward an inner circle? How can we increase the depth of people's relationships also? But just going to this last reason about providing community members the opportunity to be contributed to, I think this is one of the most important reasons to actually work on connecting people with community members. I think you and I are not in the field that we're in. We're not in the professional field that we're in because of the money that we make in it, right? So I think that people work in this field because there's something we get from people. There's things that we receive. There's gifts that we receive from knowing people. And, if you looked at your favorite people that you have worked with over the years and you think about what have they given you, people will often respond I've gotten love from them. I've gotten acceptance from them. I've gotten opportunities to contribute. I've gotten pride in seeing their accomplishment. There's many different gifts that people give us. Fellowship, unconditional love, unconditional acceptance. And so one of the ways I've seen over the years with working with many different agencies is that the people there's certain beliefs that will affect whether you're more successful in connecting people or not. And one of those beliefs is you can look and see for yourself, do you believe that community members would also be contributed to by these gifts? Do you have that belief that, from what it is we get from knowing people, do you believe that community members would also benefit? And if you have that belief, you're much more likely to be successful in this. So these are some things from, we had a year-long project in the state of Kentucky. I worked with 13 agencies over a year in Kentucky. And at the end of the year, people collected some examples of what the community members had to say who had befriended people. And these were some of the things that they said is, she taught me a different kind of love. I look forward to a lifetime of being her friend. I'd miss spending time with Wayne if he didn't come to visit. He lifts me up and makes my day. It's people like Stephen who make the world a better place. It's a true blessing to get to know him. It's life-giving for both of us. So providing community members the opportunity to receive these gifts is really important. This was from one of the program directors in that project, witnessing other people, getting to know the people we support and befriending them is the best thing in our profession. So just some examples about connecting people. So this is Klaus, who actually lived in South Dakota, and he had been in an institution, and he has very limited language. He uses a wheelchair. He doesn't walk, and his staff who were supporting him felt that he didn't have a chance to have a lot of life experiences and try out different things in terms of seeing what he was interested in. So a couple of the staff liked to play pool, so they took him to this bar where they played pool, and they learned quite a few things about Klaus that night. One of the things is that although his language is very limited and he's kind of hard to understand, they learned he could get whiskey Coke across to the bartender really well. And the other thing they learned is he got everyone in the whole place involved in their game that night, especially this table of 3 women who was sitting next to them. And when they left that night, the bartender said to the 2 women who had brought him, the bartender said, when are you bringing him back? Everyone who was here tonight had a better time because he was here. So we never know what community members receive as a contribution until we really try things. I'm going to give you some examples of some different kinds of people, different kinds of people who receive support, and one of the things is just kind of getting a sense of what the strategies or the lessons are. This is Vicki, who lived in a small town in southeast Minnesota, and she was somebody who had what some people considered kind of challenging behavior. She did a lot of inappropriate things, like she lived in her own apartment. She called up her landlord every day to bug him about coming to fix something in her apartment. She worked at a sheltered workshop, but she would get into a lot of fights, especially with the men. And the sheltered workshop wasn't moving her on to more supported or competitive employment because they said she needed to learn how to manage her behavior better. She was actually in the very first project that we had, and I learned a lot in that very first project. And one of the things I learned was that if you're going to work on connecting someone with community members, it really makes a difference if you really like that person and if you believe that they have something to offer. Because Danielle, who was Vicki's main staff person, she was very resigned about Vicki. She was very like, oh, I'm never going to find a friend for Vicki. How am I ever going to find a friend for her? She has too many behavior problems. Nobody likes her. So Danielle was kind of really resigned about her. But we just kept encouraging Danielle. We at the time, we had like monthly luncheon meetings where we brainstormed different ideas. And we just kind of kept encouraging Danielle. So one of the things that happened was Danielle had an Argentinian foreign exchange student staying with her for 6 months. And there was a dance coming up. And Danielle said, oh, I got the crazy idea to ask Pablo if he would take Vicki to the dance. And I was sure he would say no, and I was sure it would be a problem. But I asked him anyway. And so she asked Pablo, and he said, sure, no problema. Right? So Danielle came to our next friends meeting after that, and she said, I learned something really important. And this is one of the most important lessons that I can pass on to you, is she said, I learned that it never hurts to ask. And that's one of the most important lessons I can pass on to you, is you have to become an asker. You never know what people will say when you ask them, but we also will never have opportunities for people unless our community members are really asked to get to know people better, or asked to even just to get to know people or get to know people better. So, and I learned that lesson from Danielle, is it never hurts to ask. So Pablo took Vicki to the dance. She was completely thrilled. The staff had never known her to wear a dress before. She had the handsomest date at the dance. All the other women wanted to dance with Pablo. Vicki was completely thrilled and excited. She also had Pablo over to her house for dinner after the dance. So this is a woman who was a former teacher of Vicki's. Vicki had planned a birthday party for herself, and one of the things that happened is Vicki started calling people up and inviting them to come to her birthday party, Then she started calling them up every 15 minutes, and then she started calling them up and telling them what to bring her. So that's a kind of a typical thing about what kind of behavior program she had about being appropriate. But this is a former teacher of Vicky's who had actually refused to come to Vicky's birthday party because Vicky was calling her up every 15 minutes. But there was another teacher of Vicky's who had been living in Austria for a while, and she had come home for a visit, and there was an open house party for her, and Vicky was invited to come to the party, and Vicky was completely thrilled to be invited. And Vicky is also one of those people who hates to spend money. She'll complain anytime she has to spend money, but she had gone out on her own and bought the teacher a present. She bought her one of those little night lights with the stained glass panel in front of it. And after the party, the teacher wrote her a note and said, "Thank you for the beautiful gift. Every time I look at it, I think of you." And again, Vicky was really thrilled. So Danielle, who's here on the right, she just kept asking people in town, like, who do you know? This is one of our strategies. It's just like looking for, who do you know? And she just kept asking people, who do you know who might like Vicky? Vicky could sew really well. She said, like, does anybody know somebody who could sew really well that Vicky could sew with? And so somebody suggested Muffy, who's here on the left. And it turned out Muffy and Danielle had gone to school together years before. And Danielle said, oh, I just never thought of her. Now, and I know many of you probably work in smaller towns. And in smaller towns, if anybody's going to get connected to people, it'll be somebody that the staff knows probably, because the staff will probably know lots and lots of the percentage of the people who live in that town. So, but even in bigger cities, you can look at who do you know who might like the person, who's somebody that would like to get to know them. So Danielle talked to Muffy, and Muffy met Vicky, and she liked her, but we made a big distinction between a volunteer and a friend, because Muffy said, I don't want to promise to see her once a week. So it was more a relationship on their terms. But they would get together and sew together. And Muffy said, if I'm just watching the kids, Vicky can come over and help me watch the kids. And Vicky loves little children. So that was how their relationship started. Muffy suggested Vicky submit her pillow to the county craft fair. And she took it down for her the day that it needed to be submitted because Vicky had to work that day. About 4 months after these pictures were taken, the staff found that they could stop doing all the behavior programs about Vicky being appropriate. About a year and a half after these pictures were taken, about a year and a half later, Danielle, again, who was here on the right, Vicky's staff, she came to a professional conference where I was talking, and a statewide conference. And Danielle came up to me after my presentation, and she was going on and on about Vicky. And every sentence it was like, blah, 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 oh, but Vicky's doing so great, blah, 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 oh, but Vicky's doing so great. She was just going on and on about her, and it's like I couldn't shut her up almost. But I looked at Danielle, and I said, well, but Danielle, like, what happened to you? Because Danielle had lost a lot of weight, and she looked really great. And it turned out that Danielle and Vicky were in the same Weight Watchers group together, and she said that Vicky had lost 30 pounds. And I said, well, she's still seeing Muffy. She said, oh, yes. Muffy and Danielle and Vicky were all in the same Catholic women's group together, and Vicky thought it was really great to be in the same group with Muffy and Danielle. And also that summer, Muffy had taken Vicky out on a boat. Vicky had never been on a boat in her life. It was a speedboat. Danielle sort of sounded jealous. But the thing that really amazed me was the difference in Danielle, going from somebody who was so resigned about Vicky to being really someone who was so proud of her. But the things happen when we focus on what's really important to people, what's really important in life. After she lost all of her weight, Vicky got a new coat, and the executive director of the agency said it used to be that Vicky would come into the main office of the agency, which was on the main street in town. He said Vicky would come into the office and she would want to hang around and talk and hang out. And he said until you had to say, well, sorry, Vicky, I've got work to do. But he said after she lost all of her weight, she came in with her new coat. he said, really proud of herself like anybody would be who had lost that much weight. And she was like, well, you're a busy person and I'm a busy person and well, bye. And she was on her way. So the agency also helped her buy a new house, or just buy a house. She was the first person that the agency helped do this. There were several other people after this. This was Vicki's house. And it turned out that because this is a small kind of rural area, it's the kind of town where everybody hears about everything that's going on. And people heard about this handicapped woman buying her own house, and they were talking against it. And they said, like, well, why is this handicapped woman buying her own house? I don't have my own house. What are we doing with our government money? Right? But Muffy and her husband knew a lot of people in town. They were sort of like informal community leaders. And they really stood up for Vicki. And they really said, like, they told other people why it was a good thing for Vicki and why it was a good thing for the town. So it really makes a difference in terms of the community members. She also had a history of strangling cats. She grew up on a farm, but now she has her own cat also now. And then it turned out that Danielle actually left this agency, and she started her own company. She started a supported living agency. And Vicki was the first person that came with her. Vicki was kind of like her first client, right? And Danielle helped Vicki leave the sheltered workshop. She helped her get a job. And the job she found for her was at Petco, so working with animals at Petco. So in terms of just looking at strategies, one of the things we could look at is, like, if you think about your friends, where did you meet your friends? If this was more interactive, I'm sure you would say things like, at work or at school, or some of you through your family, or occasionally you meet somebody once, like in a bar, through your interests, like the clubs you belong to or the sports you engage in, or through your children. But if we think about the places where most of us meet friends, if we look at school or work or church, which is often three of the most frequent responses that I get from people, and we look at where we make friends, there's a few things that those areas have in common. One is you see the same people in the same place over time. So at school or work or church or a club or interest you're pursuing, you see the same people in the same place, but also where there's some basis for connecting and exchange. There's like doing things together to get to know each other. So there's it's not just the same clerk in the post office or McDonald's, but there's really a chance for you to get to know each other. And so there's a big shift in the agencies where I've worked with over time. There's a shift from thinking about activities to thinking about people. So I know probably everybody you support goes and does things, like they have activities in the community, but they're not always places where you see the same people in the same place. Like if someone's interested in music, when we look at people's interest in music, for example, as an example, staff will say, like, oh, we should go to a concert. Yes, but who are you going to get to know there? But if we had an interest in music, where are you going to see the same people in the same place? Like, what could people get connected to, like a community choir or a church choir, or a place where the same people hang out in terms of karaoke, for example, but also where there's some basis, like it's not just concerts in the park, for example. How could they really have a role like a high school band or chorus, or a college band or chorus? So this is one of the things, like I think it's helping people have friends. You can't add it as one more item on a to-do list that's already too long. I know all of your to-do lists and all the staff's to-do lists are too long. You can't add helping people have friends as one more item. But we can shift our thinking to not do more things, but do things differently. So when we're helping people pursue interest in the community or engage in their interests, how can we shift our thinking from just activities to asking, but who is the person going to get to know there? That's a real critical shift in the agencies I've worked with that have been more successful. I've put everything that I've come to learn over the years, or virtually everything I've come to learn, in this new manual. This is a manual that's free. It's downloadable. I'll give you the website is in the information you'll get, and also at the end of this we'll talk about. So in this manual, and then when you download it, there's also there's a manual itself, and then there's also a set of activity sheets where you can actually engage in different exercises. So as I said, when we do a whole workshop, we do exercises together. And but here's some of the basic approaches: is looking at people's interests. So interests are those things that express the meaning in a person's life. When you identify interests, you can look at where other people who share those interests. We can identify memberships and associations. I don't know if some of you are familiar, for example, with a site called meetup.com, meetup.com. We've been using that a lot in some recent projects. Someone also just pointed out to me yesterday in their local paper in their suburban area, they have a 3-page section called Get Together in their weekly paper, Get Together, and it lists all these different groups and clubs and people coming together around different interests. And interests may not be easy to define. They're discovered and developed in action, trying things out. Or how can they express the person's life calling? What is this person called to do? I learned this approach from an agency in Louisville, Kentucky. That was a day program that had about 30 people with some quite severe challenges. And one of the people, her name was Eva, and Eva was one of those people who seemed like she wasn't interested in very much. She had some temper tantrums from time to time. She had limited verbal talking, using words to communicate. She didn't seem very interested in much, except from time to time washing dishes. But they just used this approach of looking at, well, what's Eva's calling? What's Eva's calling? And they finally decided there were 2 things that Eva was called to do, was to smoke cigarettes and to drink coffee. And so what did they find in her neighborhood? They found a group of women that got together at a place called Frida's Diner every afternoon to drink coffee and smoke cigarettes. And they helped Eva join this group. They talked with Frida. They helped her join this particular group. And but they also use the approach. It's a little hard without you being able to see me physically, but they use this approach of, if you were a staff and you took Eva to Frida's Diner, most of the time your attention would be on Eva, right? That's our focus of attention is on Eva. But they used a very different approach. They really looked at Frida and the other ladies in the community. How could they help those ladies get to know Eva better? It's a completely different focus, a completely different direction. Is us standing with community members and helping them get to know Eva. So they spent a lot of time schmoozing with the ladies or helping them see Eva, see what she had to offer, but also really getting to know them also. So besides people's interests, there's people's gifts, and there's 2 kinds of gifts. What does the person do well? What are their talents and abilities? And the second thing is, what do others receive from knowing them? What do you get from knowing this person? And that can give you a way to talk with a community member about what would they get from getting to know this person. Just a couple of examples about using people's interests and gifts. This is Mitzi, who lives in a town in Minnesota called New Ulm. It's very German. It's named after Ulm, Germany. And Mitzi doesn't walk, and she has very limited speech. She says 5 things. She says hi. She says Anya, which means I love you. Any staff member is Olga. And as I said, she lives in a very German town. And she says, oh, get out of here. And she can tell people when she needs to use the bathroom. And when people started working on Mitzi having more friends, there were staff who said, how can Mitzi be anyone's friend? She doesn't really talk and she doesn't really interact. How can she be anyone's friend? So they had on a certain set of glasses, right? What you see as opportunities depends on what glasses you have on. If you have on yellow glasses, the world looks yellow, or blue glasses, the world looks blue. If you have on the glasses of looking at what do people have to offer, what are their interests and their gifts, you see something different. You can also have on a different set of glasses toward what are the opportunities in your community and from the people that you know in the community. Because there were people who supported Mitzi who had on a different set of glasses. They looked at what does Mitzi have to offer. Well, she has a beautiful smile. She tends to cry really easily also, and they thought of her as kind of being really emotional, and that she has a great big heart, and that she has a lot of love to offer people. So then it became, all right, well, where can we find somebody to receive the love that Mitzi has to offer? And so she likes little children, and they thought of her as being a big sister in the Big Sister, Little Sister program in town, and which is run by an organization called PRO, People Reaching Out. And they went to the PRO board and helped Mitzi apply to be a big sister. And the PRO board went through something about deciding about whether to accept Mitzi's application or not, and they did decide to accept it. And so they took Mitzi to a PRO meeting where there was going to be a lot of little girls, and they wanted to see if any of them would particularly respond to Mitzi. So the day that they got there, she was kind of tired, and she started to cry. And as soon as she started to cry, these two little girls came over to comfort her. And they said, oh, it's okay. And they helped. They were playing Yahtzee with her, and they made vase planters on her wheelchair tray. And then one of the girls drew this picture of Mitzi. It's cut off a little bit on the right. The thing on the lower left is a river with a bridge across it, by the way. I thought it was a spaceship for the longest time. But the staff put this picture in the log notes, and this is what she wrote about this picture. She said, this is a picture of how kids view the world. I think if we had asked an adult to draw a picture of Mitzi, the adult would start by drawing a wheelchair and trying to fit Mitzi into it. How does a child start? The wheelchair is almost minuscule, almost non-existent. The world is the most important. She said, I think that's how kids view their world. They matched Mitzi up with the other little girl whose name was Crystal, and Crystal and Mitzi would go swimming together about once a week or so. And Crystal invited Mitzi to a Girl Scout bridge crossing when she went from one part of Girl Scouts to another part of Girl Scouts. This is a big Heritage Fest parade where they bring in Umpapa bands from Germany in the summertime, and they were in the Heritage Fest parade representing PRO. On Crystal's 9th birthday, they went to the Burger King for her birthday, and when they came into the Burger King, Crystal pushed the wheelchair over next to a table of boys. And as soon as they did that, the boys got up and left. And Crystal looked right at Mitzi, and she said, it's their loss. And she told Mitzi it was her best birthday, and the best present she had was going out to supper with Mitzi. They were having lunch with Deb, with Mitzi's main staff person one day, and Crystal asked Mitzi if she thought she was too young to have a boyfriend. And the staff wrote in the log note, she said, I questioned Mitzi's judgment when Mitzi agreed it was okay, but Crystal assured her she is not kissing him because that is college stuff. She said now she and her boyfriend just share about special things. They were having lunch on another day. They had known each other for about a year at that point, and Crystal asked Deb, Mitzi's staff person, Crystal asked Deb if Mitzi was handicapped. And Deb said she was surprised because they'd known each other for a year at that point. And Deb said, why do you ask? And Crystal said, because my friends are telling me that she is handicapped and I need to know. And so Deb explained that Mitzi couldn't walk and things like that. Mitzi had an agreement to be a big sister for 2 years, and at the end of the 2 years, Crystal's mom asked that their relationship continue. And when Crystal was 14, they came and presented at a conference, and Crystal said that being friends with Mitzi was the most important thing that had ever happened to her in her life. And she said it was one of the best things that had ever happened to her in her life. She said now all of her friends wanted to have a friend who was handicapped. And people in the audience asked Crystal for her advice about what advice did she have about helping other people connect. And Crystal said, that's all you have to do is tell people to reach out. That's all they have to do. Now, if they're not the kind of person that reaches out, well, that's another thing. So they've decorated Mitzi's house for the holidays, and so they've continued to be friends. Crystal's now in her late 20s, and they've continued to be friends. And when she got married, it was really important to her to have Mitzi have a role in her wedding. And so she had Mitzi actually manage the guest sign-in book, with the staff supporting her. But that's what she did in terms of her wedding. This is Larry, who lives in the Twin Cities, and he's quadriplegic. He doesn't talk. He has a particular gift for screaming. He can scream really loud. That's the thing he does really well, especially when he's agitated. He also really likes when people play games with balls. He just lights up when people are playing a game with a ball. He's supported by a day program who supports a lot of people like Larry. They got really, really committed to connecting people in one-to-one relationships. Took that on really seriously. In their staff meetings every week, they would brainstorm ideas. One of the staff was walking through her community center one day, saw this group of semi-retired men playing volleyball, and they said, she said, this is a great place to take Larry. And so they started taking him there, but not just as an activity. They really paid attention to who were the men that were more interested in Larry, which ones liked him better, which ones asked about him if he missed a week. The men insisted Larry be in their team photo. They started having lunch with him afterward. They gave him this ball. They called Larry their #1 fan. Also, his sweatshirt also says #1 fan. There was a story about them in a local magazine, and one of the men said about him is that, one of the great things about Larry is he cheers for everybody, not just for who's winning. He just lights up your day. He just makes your day, even if you're losing. So again, what community members receive as a contribution, this is a place where Larry's gift for screaming is really appreciated. So there's 7 strategies in terms of overall connecting people. The overall question is, where are the opportunities for relationships? Who will they get to know there? There's connecting people through their gifts and interests. So the first approach is, where are people who would appreciate receiving this person's gifts? That's an example with Larry, where his gift for screaming was appreciated. In the activities worksheets that I mentioned before, there'll be sheets like this in terms of if you want to work through exercises with people. The second approach is, where are all the community places where people engage in one of this person's interests? Who are the people who share this interest? That's also a great approach with for finding people a job. Those of you who support people about looking for a job, this is just an example of an approach with cars. You don't think about the person, you think about the interest. Where are all the places anybody does anything with cars? And then they think about, well, does anybody know anybody who's got a connection in any of those particular places? This is an example with music. Somebody, Joel liked music, and someone found out he also doesn't like being around people. He gets agitated around people. So the person who was connecting him found an organist in a local church who suggested he come in just when she was practicing by herself, and she formed a deep connection with him. This is somebody in Louisiana who grew up in a real political family. She started volunteering in this campaign for this guy who was running for mayor. So where could people get connected with their interests? And then you can look at connecting with individual community members one-on-one. Who are the people who are already acquaintances who could be asked to get to know the person better? Who are the people on the outside circle? What makes sense to ask them to do? Could they have coffee with people? Could they have lunch with people? The fourth approach is where it might be that you could find an interested person who could be asked to get to know the person better, like the example with Muffy and Danielle just kept asking people, who do you know who might like Vicky, who's somebody she could sew with. These are some examples of finding an interested person. Who do you know who might like them? We've been very successful. Many congregations have social ministry programs. There's Befrienders is one program. Faith in Action is another program. Just social ministry programs and connecting people in one-to-one. Sometimes there's formal volunteer programs such as Best Buddies. Former staff can often be invited back into someone's life who really loved the person, who loved working with them. And sometimes family members of staff can also, who really like the person, can also have their own connection. The last group of the 7 approaches to connecting is more about community membership. So where the associations, clubs, and groups, both formal and informal. This was somebody did this research in one neighborhood in Chicago, found all kinds of different groups and clubs just in one particular neighborhood. These are some examples in Louisiana of connecting people. Miss Cecilia, who's here in the middle, was one of those kind of challenging people, again, who didn't seem interested in many things. She did go to church, but the agency supporting her really wanted her to have more membership and sense of belonging in the church. The one thing Miss Cecilia liked was dressing up and looking pretty. So what did they find in the church? They found the Church Beautification Club. And these 2 ladies on either side of her were the chair and the co-chair of the Church Beautification Club. And they really included Cecilia as a member. Miss Audrey, who's here in the lower right, liked to really quilt. And the executive director of the agency said quilting is the kind of thing that you can let people do by themselves in their own apartment. But the director said we forced ourselves to find a place of membership and belonging. And the local community center, they found this group of people who got together informally to pursue different crafts and quilting and sewing projects. And then this young lady also joined the Rotary. The woman who's standing is not the Rotary, the Elks. The woman who's standing, Miss Lucille, is a tri-state director of the Elks. And Sandy, who's using the wheelchair here, she heard about what the Elks does. She wanted to become a member of it, and Miss Lucille sponsored her. Sandy had been hit by a car when she was in high school. She was hit by a drunk driver, and she had a vision of becoming a public speaker, going around to high schools and talking to high school students about the dangers of drunk driving. And Miss Lucille helped her develop that career. Another approach is where there are community places that are hospitable and welcoming. You know, finding the welcoming places, local places, small family-owned businesses seem to be more welcoming. The last thing is important: one person, one environment. If the Elks Club is welcoming of Sandy, then don't have like everybody else join the Elks Club. Then it was like Sandy's place. And then the last approach is where are there community places the person can fit in just the way that they are. So no matter what kind of behavior they have, where can they fit in just the way that they are. And so what we do, this is in the manual, just to kind of like summarize. I'm going to move to questions in a minute. I'm just going to kind of give you some, just quickly go through some other things. What we do is we have people brainstorm different ideas and then select which 3 places to try, which 3 are the best ideas after you brainstorm a lot of different ideas. You have to deal with like fears about asking people. The person with disabilities might have fears, the family, staff, or community members all might be afraid. How would you talk to people? What would maximize getting a yes response? And we practice that. What's more likely to have a positive response to people? We look at, we actually practice what would you ask people at the church, or what would you ask people in terms of having coffee, or what makes sense? What are you going to say about the person? What are you going to ask the community member for? You think about what would be the benefit to the community member in getting to know the person. What would they get from knowing them? Is there anything they should know about them? For example, that they're hard to understand when they talk. And then after the initial connection, how are you going to deepen the relationship? This will all be in the information that Lana's going to send out to you. There's different structures in the agencies I've worked with over time. There's lots of different structures, like changing their job descriptions, changing connecting to being more of an expectation of people. Just one little point is sometimes people say, like, oh, we can't talk with community members because of confidentiality. But confidentiality doesn't mean you can't talk to people. It means you can't talk to people without permission. So we always have the team's alignment, the guardian's alignment, and in terms of introducing people, and we talk to people, how do you want to be introduced to people? This is another action sheet, like after you brainstorm ideas, like who's going to do what, how are you going to follow up? Working on relationships takes time, it takes effort. Not everything you do is going to be successful. So this is the manual and the activity sheets. These are just some tips for success, is like that I have is, can you see the person as their interests and their gifts? Can you explore the opportunities for relationships? Who are they going to get to know there? Introducing one-to-one. It's one person meeting one person, one environment, becoming an asker. Remember that it never hurts to ask. And I've also found in people who are more successful that they have really some important beliefs. Do you value and personally appreciate that person? Do you believe they have something to offer? If you do, you're going to be more successful. Do you have your faith and trust in community members? Not like blindly connecting people, but do you believe that you can find some community members who would be interested in this person? It's not going to be everybody, but do you believe you can find people? And do you believe that's important for everyone? That's important for the person, for the community member, for the staff, for you, to build a more inclusive community, that this is a really important arena to work on. As Cicero said, life is nothing without friendship. You'll get, like, this is my contact information if you wanted to email me directly or call me or interested in other training or a specific question. Here's the email, here's the website for that manual. If you, as I said, it's free. If you want to download it, you can also get, there's a whole book with many different chapters in it by different people. There's also a website called qualitymall.org that has a lot of different resources on it in many different areas, but there's two departments. One is friendship and social inclusion, and empowering communities for inclusion. So, okay, Lana, what kind of questions have we gotten from people?
Okay, well, thank you so very much. This is wonderful information, and we will go to ask questions now. If anybody does have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and type them in. We have a few minutes that we can spend. The first question is asking for advice on ways to help the individuals that we support get to know their neighbors. It seems as though oftentimes the individuals that we support don't even get to know their neighbors that live in their neighborhood or on their street for those without disabilities. So any suggestions?
Sure. Well, one thing, it's very funny. Neighbors are really an interesting phenomenon, because if for everybody on the phone, like, probably there's some people who know their neighbors and probably some people who don't, right? It kind of like depends on the neighborhood that you live in, or like what kind of neighborhood it is, and if people are if it's that kind of neighborly thing or not. So there's different things people have done. If they, for instance, have dogs, or there's bringing things over to them, there's having an open house and inviting people over. So it's kind of like, how would you get to know any any neighbors, any type of neighbors, even not people who have disabilities. So those are kind of some of the strategies that people have done. It also helps just to go over and meet people yourself and, know their name, know what kind of interests they have. Do they have kids? Do they have, what kind of work do they do, etc. So I don't know if that answered that question or not, but
yes, very good. I'm sorry, I was just typing so that we could have that.
I got it. All right, good.
I'm just going to finish that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. We have several comments. One comment saying this was such an eye-opening information and that they absolutely loved the presentation. Very inspiring, and thank you very much.
Great.
So, and actually have several comments along those lines. The next question is, do you have any advice on helping those direct care staff or encouraging staff to become askers, especially those staff that may be more resistant to that?
Well, when you're starting out something new like this, like if this is a whole new arena for you, it's really good to start with the staff that are more open or more enthusiastic or more hospitable themselves, let's say, and different agencies I've worked with have kind of broken it down in different ways. One staff might pick one person to focus on, so maybe you might have one staff that just they value a particular person who receives services, right? So they're willing to brainstorm ideas, and it's you want to start with something that's safe for the staff also, or an area where they might have a particular interest, or someone that they would be willing to ask. Like yesterday, I was talking about somebody who was going to a particular church, and we were talking about, well, who are the church members who are more open to that person? So one thing is just starting to open up the staff's eyes, first of all, to who are the community members who are more interested in that person, and then actually just practice what would be okay to ask them, to practice staff to staff so that they feel safe. And then I kind of went over it quickly about the thing about what's more likely to get a yes. So if staff looked at, when you're asked to do something, what has you more likely to say yes? For example, if somebody's willing to come along with you, or it's the right person who's asking you, or you see what's in it for you. So you can practice those things about what has anybody be more likely to say yes. The staff themselves, what has them feel more comfortable when somebody asks them to do something.
Great. That's very good information. Someone has asked or wants to make sure that this presentation will be archived so that they can share it. Yes, it absolutely will within a couple of days. This will be available on IPMG's website. There is a section under resources where we archive all of our professional development workshops, and that website is go-to-ipmg.com. That will include today's recording as well as associated materials. And as I mentioned at the beginning of today's presentation, all of the registrants and attendees will be receiving an email within a couple of business days that includes that information as well. So it will be available definitely as information to share. And I would also encourage you to go to the website that Angela's provided, as well as those free resources that can be used. Someone has asked if you could just, and I think we have time for just a couple more questions, but to speak a little bit on the difference between what you feel the difference is between a friend and a volunteer.
Sure. and I know it's only scheduled for an hour. I'm fine to stay on and answer more questions. I did, and if people have to leave or there's more, I did put up my phone number and email. You can also email me directly if you had another question also. So a volunteer is often connected to the agency rather than to the person. So that's kind of like one difference. And it's often kind of a more formal agreement. Like, now, there's been many volunteers who've actually had very personal and intimate relationships with people and who actually do end up sort of becoming friends with people. But a friendship is usually just kind of more personal, based on the person really liking that community member really liking that person, and it being more based on that kind of personal connection between people. So, and volunteers often sort of have a time-limited agreement, like they'll volunteer for a year, and then, and then it's like, who's the next volunteer, right? So, but a friendship usually will be sort of more long-lasting. And volunteers, at least here in Minnesota and in many states, so I don't know exactly in Indiana, but often volunteers have particular training requirements, or they'll have a requirement to have a background check. I don't know if that's true the statewide basis there in Indiana, but many agencies will have that. So it's often sort of a more formal thing, as opposed to a one-to-one connection, one human being connecting to another human being. So those are some of the differences.
Another question is asking that, have you found providers, if they have like an anti-fraternization policy, does that get in the way of helping them foster friendships by introducing them to people that they know? So if there's some sort of policy where maybe staff or employees are not able to, have social relationships with individuals outside of their work setting, have you encountered that type of situation?
Yeah. Say the exact word in the original question. The what is it? What was the name of the policy?
Anti-fraternization policy.
Oh, anti-fraternization.
Yeah,
okay,
sorry.
Good. I didn't.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. There's a whole range. This is a kind of a complex thing, and I've encountered many agencies with a whole range of responses and dealing with things. So there's with the way that they approach this issue. So, there's some agencies that say no fraternization outside of work, and that's completely fine, and completely understandable. And part of it, there's fears, especially, let's say in a supported living situation where it's a one-to-one support, where the agency is concerned, or the manager is concerned with, if the staff takes the person receiving services to their son's softball game, that it's because of the staff's interest, not because of the person's interest, right? And so there's one agency that I've worked with over a number of years where what they worked out as a remedy or solution was the staff, who, if they knew the person was interested in softball or in sports, they could take the person to their son's softball game if the staff had gotten the alignment of their manager and gotten the alignment of the team, that they were really doing it for the person's interest and because the person really wanted to do that. So they had to kind of get permission and alignment in terms of connecting. Or, for example, a staff who the person they supported really liked archery, and their husband, and the staff's husband was really into it, and so they knew that the husband could be a great connector to other groups, but again, they had to kind of get the alignment of people that way. So there's on the other end, completely the other end, it's like the agency, so like, well, no, the staff should be connecting people to their own personal network because, you know, that's kind of like the best opportunities, and that's where sort of some of the best, the staff like knows lots of people, and so they didn't have kind of like any policy against it. So as I said, I've kind of like encountered the whole range of kind of across the board regarding it. So it's just kind of like really up to the agency, and all those approaches are kind of completely understandable. And as people have gotten more into this, they've kind of had to really think about those policies and think about what do they want people to do. And then certainly there's the whole thing of not taking people home and doing things with people that you're actually paid to do in terms of the Department of Labor regulations about, you know, not providing things on unpaid time that you do on paid time. So there's also that kind of policy. So I hope that.
So that was very, very good information, and I think just looking at what that particular agency's regulations would be or policies, and then working with the individual that's being supported along with all of their their family, and support members. We have one other question asking if you have ever worked with certified recreational therapists as part of the effort toward friendship and inclusion. So working with recreational therapy.
Yes, absolutely. And there's a whole and if you have recreational therapists in your company, or that's a support that you can get from people. There's a I can't remember the name of it. It's called Leisure Recreation, and I forgot the third word in the title, of a Canadian scholar that I learned a lot from. And then I just kind of recently was at a conference myself where the people, they were explaining the difference between leisure and recreation, and that some people engage in leisure things for the skill of it, for the physical activity of it. But when we think about our own recreation, that recreation is when we really have fun, and we're doing things with people because it's fun to be with them and to share with them. So the more that we can kind of, if you're working with recreational therapists that have that perspective, that's great. And then I think we can do more to help have recreational therapists also be involved in these efforts regarding not just going to a game or engaging in an activity for the physical activity or the exercise of it, but also for the connections that can get built out of it, and for the fun in terms of connecting with people that have the same interests that we do. So I hope that makes sense and addresses the question.
Yes, it does. Thank you so much. I think that is all of the questions that we have posted, as well as there are many comments on how great the information was today. And as Indiana and other states are definitely moving towards, true community inclusion and integration as part of the CMS final rule, I think that the more information and education that we can have on this, the better. And I just would like to thank you on behalf of IPMG and all of those that attended today. Thank you for your time and for the information that you provided. It was truly very valuable.
Great, thank you. Thanks, everybody, for listening. I'm glad you found it valuable. Thanks.
And
thanks for inviting me.
Thank you, everyone, for attending. As I said, we'll be sending out the information and posting the information on our website within a couple of days. We have to pull it all together, but it will be out within 2 business days, so please look for that. If you have any questions, Angela has provided her contact information or email information. She's encouraged you to reach out. And thank you again. Everyone have a great rest of your day and a great weekend. Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.